Bugs crashing your pack's party? Whether they've got paws or sneakers, your pack deserves a home that's protected from pests. That's where Wondercide comes in. Plant-powered protection made with steam-distilled natural essential oils that actually work. It kills and repels fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, and ants without questionable ingredients or overpowering smells. Safe to use around kids and pets when used as directed, lab-proven to work fast, and proudly made in the USA. We offer sprays for pets, people, homes, and yards. Plus, spot-on treatments, collars, and even shampoos. Whatever your pack needs, we've got it covered. Founded by a pet parent looking for a better way to protect her dog Luna, Wondercide's now protected over 21 million lives and counting. You might have even seen us on Shark Tank. Go to Wondercide.com and use code WONDER20 for 20% off your first order. That's WONDER20 at Wondercide.com. Wondercide. Protect your pack with plant-powered Wondercide today.
If the road to hell is paved with good intentions, what is the road to success paved with? Even if one's goal is holy and righteous, how long does it take fame and fortune to divert us? Once the money starts rolling in, can we ever truly remember who we once were? Welcome to Strange and Unexplained with me, Daisy Egan. When I was maybe 14 years old, I was in a workshop of a musical about Aimee Semple McPherson, which was not, incidentally, the musical about Aimee Semple McPherson that ended up on Broadway and flopped in 2012. I don't remember a single thing about the one I was in, except there was one scene in a revival tent, and Christopher McDonald, the guy who played Thelma's husband in Thelma and Louise, was in it. I loved him. He was very funny. Actually, in an odd way, the phenomenon of Thelma and Louise is similar to that of Aimee Semple McPherson. Both are stories of strong women declaring their independence from men. Sort of. For Thelma and Louise, their cages were built by a loveless marriage, dead-end jobs, and being a woman in America in the late 20th century with men who controlled and didn't appreciate them. Aimee, on the other hand, thought she was building a palace around herself when in truth, with each brick of the empire she built, she was sealing herself into a cell. In both stories, the women have to take extraordinary measures to gain their freedom, and both stories end tragically. Though perhaps aspects of Thelma and Louise haven't aged tremendously well, spoiler alert, but it says a lot about where we were as a culture that our great feminist empowerment tome told us the only way to happiness is to literally drive off a cliff. It was well written, well acted, and had a young Brad Pitt who we all hated to see leave but loved to watch walk away. Whereas the Broadway musical about Aimee Semple McPherson was, well, first of all, a musical produced in part by Aimee's own church, Red Flag, and even though it had the absolutely divine Carolee Carmello, it was directed by one of the worst directors I have ever worked with, hands down. Different project, doesn't matter, moving on. So it definitely had a few strikes against it coming out of the gate. Which is a shame, because Aimee's story is far wilder than anything Hollywood writers could conjure, and was 100% true. Well, for the most part. Aimee Kennedy was born in 1890 in Ontario, Canada. Her mother, Minnie, was married at age 15 to a man 35 years her senior, who was also the farmer for whom she worked as a maid. While she was pregnant with Aimee, Minnie had a deep feeling that her baby would be destined for lofty and divine things. A servant of God. Minnie was involved in the Church of Salvation, as in the Salvation Army, as in the thrift stores, Santa ringing bells, and the folks from Guys and Dolls. Aimee's upbringing was strict. She wasn't allowed to listen to non-church music or do much of anything extracurricularly that didn't directly involve God. This concept baffles me. It seems like every extreme version of religion involves forbidding things that bring so much joy. Music, dancing, sex. Music is something that has come out of every single culture since recorded history. If it's so natural for humans to make it, why do so many versions of God hate it so much? Anyway. Despite her strict upbringing, Aimee was drawn to performing and used it as a means to express her faith. Aimee was so faithful that she managed to convert her reluctant classmates. In her great book, Sister, Sinner, The Miraculous Life and Mysterious Disappearance of Aimee Semple McPherson, author and historian Claire Hoffman writes, quote, "When her classmates mocked her for being a part of the Salvation Army, she made a drum set from a metal cheese box and a ruler, and soon, according to Aimee, she had her detractors following her around the schoolyard as she banged the drum, pantomiming the very thing they'd mocked," end quote. This passage highlights Aimee's talent for using theatricality to draw people in, which would become a central tenet in Aimee's life and career. But it's worth noting that everything we know about Aimee's young life comes almost exclusively from her own memoirs. And while it's always impossible to know how much a writer may have embellished, to put it kindly, about their own lives, Aimee, as we will learn, may not have been the world's most reliable narrator. Theatrical and compelling? Absolutely. Truthful and honest? Maybe not so much. Despite her religious fervor when she was young, Aimee found herself tempted by secular music and dance as she got into her teens after a teacher told her the Bible was wrong when it came to how humans were created. Apparently, it had literally never occurred to her before that moment that God might not have created Adam and Eve out of mud and Adam's rib, respectively. She developed what she would later describe as overwhelming doubts about her faith. Aimee got involved with local theater and high school shows and loved performing. Despite Aimee's doubts and in spite of her mother's disapproval, had she known, Aimee's father took her to see a Holy Ghost revival in 1907 when she was 17. She convinced him basically by saying it would be fun to go laugh at them and their weird ways. These particular faithful were called holy rollers for their habit of falling down and writhing on the floor when struck with the spirit. Aimee sat there watching the proceedings with an unearned air of superiority, mostly because she felt she was dressed nicer than the parishioners were, and their method of praising God was so much more boisterous than her own faith would allow. Her haughtiness, however, vanished the moment the handsome young preacher stepped out and began warning the congregants, as Hoffman writes, about the dangers inherent in a life that includes church only on Sundays, with the rest of the week being spent in sins like, quote, dancing, singing, ice skating, going to the motion pictures, and listening to ragtime music, end quote. Who knew the devil even knew what ice was, let alone ice skating? One imagines ice doesn't stick around too long when the devil's there. From what I hear, he's a pretty hot dude, temperature-wise. Anyway, when the preacher began speaking in tongues, though she didn't understand the sounds, she felt he was speaking directly to her through God, saying, "You are a poor, lost, miserable, hell-deserving sinner." And in that moment, Aimee later wrote, she thought, quote, "Oh, how could I have looked down upon these dear people and felt that I was better than they? Why, I was not even worthy enough to black their shoes. They were saints, and I was a sinner," end quote. Listen, teenage lust is a powerful thing. It made Romeo and Juliet kill themselves. It made me lose my virginity to a guy who called himself Saturn. And it brought Aimee back to the path of the righteous. God works in mysterious ways. Aimee became more devout than ever, praying all the time, probably being pretty insufferable, and sneaking off to watch the handsome preacher Robert Semple preach. And then, one morning while praying for the Lord to fill her, he apparently did, and she began to speak in tongues for the first time. That is, being struck by God to speak what may sound to the outside ear like utter nonsense, but to the utterer, apparently, has meaning. She took that as a message that she was meant to fulfill her mother's wish, that she would serve God. Strangers, another day, another compliment on my beautiful cashmere sweater from Quince. Fall is nearly upon us. How did that happen? And it's the perfect time to refresh your wardrobe with pieces that feel as good as they look. Luckily, Quince makes it easy to look polished, stay warm, and save big without compromising on quality. Quince has all the elevated essentials for fall. Think 100% Mongolian cashmere from $50, washable silk tops and skirts, and perfectly tailored denim. By partnering directly with ethical, top-tier factories and cutting out the middlemen, Quince delivers luxury quality pieces at half the price of similar brands. I think I have 4 Quince sweaters now, a drawer full of their super comfortable t-shirts in black, and a set of washable silk pajamas for when I'm feeling extra fancy. Keep it classy and cozy this fall with long-lasting staples from Quince. Go to quince.com/strange for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/strange to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/strange. Aimee was smitten with the charismatic, handsome young pastor and took every measure after that point to spend as much time as possible with Robert and his congregants. And 9 months after they'd met, in August 1908, the couple married after he'd proposed to her by basically saying, "I love you, and also I want you to come to China with me and convert all the heathens there." For the 17-year-old girl from rural Canada, who would likely never see much more of the world than her own town and the next town over otherwise, the proposal must have seemed like a gift from God. She got the handsome guy, she'd get to travel the world, and she could serve the Lord. Triple dunk. Her mother, Minnie, was not exactly thrilled. Not only was Aimee very young, but it seems Minnie just kind of wanted to keep Aimee to herself. She had not planned to have to share her with a man. Certainly not this soon. So Minnie just kind of pieced out. Her husband was still very much alive, if pretty old, 71, but she was like, "Bye, Bob," and moved to New York City to be close to the Salvation Army headquarters there. With her daughter gone, she redevoted herself to her first love, the church. China was lousy with Protestant missionaries in 1910. One of the first missionaries was a man named T.J. McIntosh from North Carolina who had believed that the language he was speaking when he spoke in tongues was Chinese because he'd heard someone speak Chinese at some point and, I guess, decided he knew what Chinese sounded like. Unclear if he knew there were about 300 different languages spoken in China. When he got to China to spread the word of God in Chinese, he was disappointed and, I would imagine, pretty embarrassed to learn he was just speaking gibberish. But rather than admit he was speaking gibberish, he told himself and others that what he was speaking was actually just a private language between him and God meant for him to translate out to the world. Anyway, such was the atmosphere among the white Christian missionaries in China when Aimee and Robert landed there in 1910 to add to the fray. Aimee was not a big fan. As Hoffman writes, quoting Aimee from her 1919 memoir, This Is That, quote, "She was overwhelmed by the smell, convinced that, quote, the air was filled with demons and the hosts of hell in the wicked, benighted country where, for many centuries, devil worship has been an open custom," end quote. Hoffman continues, quote, "Repulsed by the peculiar local food, Aimee and Robert subsisted on tin milk and potatoes," end quote. Okay. Robert's disgust at the local culture would be short-lived, however, literally, when 2 months after arriving, he contracted malaria. He died in August 1910 in China. Aimee was infected at the same time, but survived. On September 17th, she gave birth to her and Robert's daughter, Roberta Starr Semple. Word spread back home that 19-year-old Aimee was alone with a newborn who was only 4.5 pounds and whom doctors said only had a 30% chance of survival, and Minnie organized a collection to bring Aimee home as soon as possible. On board the ship, she spent Sundays reading scripture to the other passengers who were so taken with the young widowed new mother that when they landed in San Francisco, they handed her another collection, which helped get her to New York City to be reunited with her mother. Aimee, now living with her mother, fell into a depression. She felt disconnected from God again. So Minnie put a halt to her own local missionary work with the Salvation Army to stay home with the baby and let Aimee go out and do the work instead, figuring it would get her out of her funk. Aimee was assigned to ring a bell and get donations outside a Broadway theater, which apparently served to remind her of how much fun she'd had in the brief period of her teenage years when she'd allowed herself to listen to secular music, perform in plays, and engage in the devil's favorite activity, ice skating. And it was then that the door to these sinful vices was nudged further open by a young man named Harold McPherson, who first saw Aimee ringing her bell and calling out in Jesus' name, and gradually gathered up the courage to approach her and ask her to ice skate. Hoffman describes their courtship as being one of desperate enthusiasm on Harold's part and lukewarm practicality on Aimee's. She wanted stability, but she told him in no uncertain terms that God would always come first, no matter what. He agreed, though in retrospect it seems he, like many men, just figured he would be able to change his wife once he nailed her down. Once again, Minnie was less than enthused about the whole enterprise. She didn't think Harold was good enough for her daughter, and Harold, sensing this, proposed to Aimee that they move to Chicago, where the environment might be better for little Roberta, who remained a sickly child from birth. But they didn't last long in Chicago. Despite Harold's best efforts to turn Aimee into a housewife and doting mother, Aimee insisted on going out and spreading the gospel on the streets. In 1912, Aimee got pregnant again, and Harold decided moving back to his home in Providence, Rhode Island would be just the ticket. So they moved to Providence into an apartment next to his parents, which Aimee hated. By the time she gave birth to her son, Rolf, Aimee was in a full-blown depression, which may have been worsened by postpartum depression or possibly psychosis if her mother-in-law Annie was to be believed when she recounted years later that Aimee was incredibly abusive toward the newborn. I'm not sure there are any doctor or hospital records to back up those claims, however. There doesn't seem to be any other indication of this abuse outside of Annie's account, and it's a little hard to believe that anyone would sit by and watch that kind of abuse take place and not do anything to stop it. In fact, Annie suggested that the young couple and their 2 children move. She couldn't have been too worried about Rolf. At any rate, Aimee was incredibly depressed. She had trouble caring for her children, she was a terrible housewife, girl, same, and she felt like she'd failed her mother, who had prophesied all those years ago that she would be an important religious figure. After a complete nervous breakdown that landed her in the hospital and near death twice, Aimee received another message from God telling her to GTFO of Rhode Island. And once again, Minnie stepped in to save the day, this time sending her money enough to literally escape with her 2 kids while her husband was out with friends one night. She went back to Canada, where Minnie met up with her, and then sent her to a 10-day tent revival to get right with God again. On the way to the revival, Aimee sent a telegram back to Harold saying, quote, "I have tried to walk your way and failed. Won't you come now and walk my way? I am sure we will be happy," end quote. Harold sent a flurry of letters back that, according to Aimee's memoirs, demanded she come back to Providence to be a proper housewife and, quote, act like other women. But as those letters gathered, Aimee was at the tent revival having a serious come-to-Jesus experience, where basically the Lord hit her like a Mack truck, and her faith was sparked anew and deeper than ever. The change was so profound that a woman with her own Pentecostal congregation in a nearby town asked Aimee to come preach the gospel there. And while many believed women did not belong on the pulpit, Aimee was convinced that God had ordained her and buoyed her once again in order to do that very thing. But when Aimee arrived at the tiny church at which she'd been invited to preach, it was empty. So she grabbed a chair and ran out into the town square and literally just stood on the chair with her hands raised in silence until a crowd had gathered around her, at which point she jumped off the chair and held it above her head as she ran back to the church, where about 50 curious onlookers followed her and listened to her preach for 40 minutes. Aimee used this charisma and theatricality to draw more and more congregants in until, as Hoffman notes, quote, by the third night, the services had to be moved outside as the crowd swelled, end quote. And thus began Aimee's preaching career. By then, Harold had made his way to Canada and to the service Aimee was leading. The change in Aimee from depressed housewife taken to her bed to this lively, loud, enthusiastic, and seemingly ecstatic preacher was enough to convince Harold that she was where she needed to be. He converted then and there to Pentecostalism. Her condition for staying married to him was that he support her in any way she needed in her goal to convert as many souls as she could. He agreed, and they returned together to the home Aimee had been sharing with her mother and 2 children, and announced their plan to become traveling evangelists. Again, Minnie was not pleased. Basically, anytime Aimee was like, I'm out, Minnie wasn't happy. Not codependent at all. She convinced Aimee that little Roberta was too sickly for an unpredictable life on the road, so Roberta stayed behind with her grandmother. And so, in 1916, Aimee, with Harold and Rolf in tow, traveled back to New England and began preaching in pop-up tents until they'd made enough, but only just enough money, through the collection plate to travel to Florida, where, by what I can only assume was some cruel joke, God told her she had to go and preach. They slept outdoors, in their car, or at the homes of congregants. Somewhere along this trip, Aimee became convinced that she had healing powers and claimed she'd healed 2 young men of broken bones and even healed a woman of cancer simply by praying over them. While in Savannah, Georgia, Aimee started a magazine she said she'd received step-by-step instructions to make from her buddy Jesus Christ. He seems like an awfully helpful fellow. Less than 2 years after they'd set out on their pilgrimage, Harold, apparently tired of eating canned corn and crackers, sleeping in makeshift shelters, and being referred to as, quote, the preacher's husband, was less than enthusiastic about the whole endeavor and told Aimee he'd had enough of life on the road. Aimee then put Rolf in the car and drove away without her husband. But Minnie, as always, was immediately there to replace the feckless, useless man in Aimee's life. And now it was Aimee, Minnie, Roberta, and Rolf piled into the car, spreading the good word. Strangers, if you're like me and you feel like you need some relief from the crazy hamster wheel of doom, but you don't want to feel altered, I highly recommend Cornbread Hemp CBD gummies. Cornbread Hemp uses only the best part of the hemp plant, the flower, for the purest, most potent CBD. Their CBD gummies are formulated to help relieve discomfort, stress, and sleepiness. Plus, all their products are third-party lab tested and USDA organic to ensure safety and purity. But if you're looking for the benefits of THC, Cornbread Hemp has delicious THC gummies and seltzers. With flavors like raspberry limeade, peach, blueberry breeze, and salted watermelon, if you show up to a party with THC seltzer, you're going to be the life of that party. Right now, Strange and Unexplained listeners can save 30% on their first order. Just head to cornbreadhemp.com/strange and use code STRANGE at checkout. That's cornbreadhemp.com/strange. And use code STRANGE.
Bugs crashing your pack's party? Whether they've got paws or sneakers, your pack deserves a home that's protected from pests. That's where Wondersight comes in. Plant-powered protection made with steam-distilled natural essential oils that actually work. It kills and repels fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, and ants without questionable ingredients or overpowering smells. Safe to use around kids and pets when used as directed. Lab-proven to work fast. And proudly made in the USA. We offer sprays for pets, people, homes, and yards. Plus, spot-on treatments, collars, and even shampoos. Whatever your pack needs, we've got it covered. Founded by a pet parent looking for a better way to protect her dog Luna, Wonderside's now protected over 21 million lives and counting. You might have even seen us on Shark Tank. Go to Wonderside.com and use code WONDER20 for 20% off your first order. That's WONDER20 at Wonderside.com. Wonderside. Protect your pack with plant-powered Wonderside today.
Minnie was a better businesswoman than Aimee, and for the first time since she'd started on this journey, Aimee's travel and board were now covered at Minnie's insistence by each host church that asked her to come make an appearance. The foursome spent 2 months traveling across the country because God told Aimee to go to Los Angeles, preaching anywhere they'd been invited along the way, staying with Pentecostal families, many of whom had members with the Spanish flu, which Aimee would later claim she healed with her divine powers. In addition to having her travel expenses covered, Minnie also gathered subscribers to Aimee's new magazine, and a national following to go with it, so that by the time they landed in Los Angeles in December of 1918, though Aimee claims they had nothing more than, quote, $10 and a tambourine, they were already making an income through the magazine. And by April, her followers had built her and her small family a bungalow in Hollywood. The home was not much more than a landing pad and a holding area for her children as Aimee continued to travel and preach, building a following and some savings. Hoffman quotes Aimee's memoir of this time, quote, "I was never away from my children for more than 10 to 12 weeks at a time, though my returning necessitates a trip of 3,000 miles. As soon as I had loved and cuddled the kiddies and seen to their welfare on these hurried trips home, I would start back again for the next revival." End quote. 10 to 12 weeks is an awful long time to be away from your children, especially when leaving them as she did with a housekeeper. I don't point this out to shame Aimee for choosing a career over her children. I only point it out to foreshadow their relationship troubles later on down the road of this story. As Aimee gained followers up and down the West Coast, she was gaining notice in Los Angeles. Papers began to cover her, though at first only in the women's section. You know, because of the whole uterus thing. Men get very uncomfortable having to think about women as anything other than baby and food makers. In fact, in order to allay men's fears about women preaching, as they had typically been banned from doing in almost every Judeo-Christian religious denomination, Aimee said that the reason women should be allowed to preach is because women were the ones who mucked everything up in the first place by eating the apple. LOL. Around this time, she published her first memoir, which I mentioned earlier. Its full title was This Is That: Personal Experiences, Sermons, and Writings of Aimee Semple McPherson, Evangelist, copies of which sold for the equivalent of $85 in today money. She was asked to come to Ohio to preach and was greeted by hundreds upon hundreds of sick and wounded worshipers hoping the lady preacher might heal them. The massive throng of people there just to see and be healed by her bolstered her view that she was ordained by God Himself to do this work. And she went back to Los Angeles with her heart set on building a place of worship worthy of her gifts. She managed to hire a big-deal Los Angeles contracting firm, promising to pay them in installments because the owner of the company wanted to add a religious building to its list of prestigious Los Angeles buildings. They set about building a modest tabernacle. And then, in January 1921, Aimee was asked to come to a stint in San Diego at Dreamland Arena, a place more suited to boxing and entertainment than church. It was not the kind of audience Aimee was used to, but she managed to convince the crowd the night before her first sermon, who were there for a boxing match, to show up for her sermon. She was met largely with jeers and laughter, but sure enough, the 3,000-seat arena filled the next morning, not only with the boxing audience, but with more sick and infirm hoping to be healed by Aimee. Toward the end of her stint at Dreamland, Aimee had recruited 30,000 worshipers at a revival she held in Balboa Park and went back home to Los Angeles with the equivalent of $75,000 in her pocket. Now she was ready to build a real temple, and she wanted it to be big. In just over a year, through offerings made to the collection plate and selling seats in the church to worshipers, Aimee raised enough to realize her vision. Incidentally, when Aimee returned from San Diego, she was greeted by official divorce papers from Harold, who, according to Hoffman, claimed, quote, desertion and extreme cruelty. He wrote that she had repeatedly hit him, tore his hair and clothes, and threatened to kill him and herself, end quote. He also claimed Minnie had threatened his life. Aimee opened Foursquare Church in Angelus Temple, the largest church in America, on New Year's Day of 1923. It was indeed large. It cost about $6 million in today money to build, and very grand. Hoffman writes, quote, by the end of the first year, Aimee's church was employing more than 100 people, and daily visitors numbered more than 7,000. The temple was a veritable city unto itself. 24 departments made up the corporate body, ranging from administration and finance to the on-staff electricians to the vast musical theater production department, end quote. People could pay to be baptized, and there was a room called the Miracle Room, which held discarded implements of those healed by Aimee, crutches, wheelchairs, and so on. There was a Sunday school with more than 1,200 students who would march through the streets with banners recruiting even more followers, so that upwards of 7,500 people at a time would show up for services. The services became more and more elaborate, ornate, and theatrical, with casts of characters, choruses, and live animals. Aimee was the main attraction, and Minnie was the machine behind it all, managing everything from the staff to the payroll to the schedule for the Watchtower, not the Jehovah's Witness magazine, but rather a room in which volunteers prayed nonstop 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In 1924, Aimee became the first woman to get an FCC radio license, and she built a radio station in her temple, hired a secular engineer from the Los Angeles Times radio station, Kenneth Ormiston, and began broadcasting sermons and shows that aligned with the Foursquare Church mission. The temple grew and grew. Between the massive services, the magazine bridal call, and the radio station, Aimee's reach was unprecedented. And despite the money flowing in, it appears that Aimee still lived rather modestly, with her mother Minnie taking on most of the roles a personal staff might play, including, as journalist Alma Whitaker noted after spending some time with the pair, as nanny, personal assistant, CEO, and manager. It bears mentioning here that Aimee had gathered a few enemies along the way, mostly just by virtue of owning a uterus and having the nerve to be a successful religious figure. She was not the first successful Pentecostal preacher in the United States, but she was absolutely the most famous one and the only one with a radio station. It really chapped the asses of other preachers who didn't believe women should do anything other than cook, make babies, and serve their husbands, to see that not only was Aimee so successful, with arguably the largest following of any religious figure in the country, but that she was, horror of horrors, unmarried. But it wasn't just misogynistic preachers. Aimee was also drawing the ire of leaders of the vast underbelly of Los Angeles, and, in turn, with the police and leaders who were in cahoots with the leaders of the underbelly of Los Angeles. As Hoffman puts it, quote, the law in Los Angeles in the 1920s openly engaged in a symbiotic relationship with the underworld, end quote. But while she was rubbing up against the corrupt side of Los Angeles law enforcement, she was also being lauded by the public-facing arm, being ordained as an honorary chief of the fire department, and inviting the assistant district attorney, Asa Kais, to speak at the temple on the part of the church in law enforcement. Jesus would have been thrilled. He notoriously loved authority figures. She also ran a campaign to ban the teaching of evolution in schools. Meanwhile, big business leaders in Los Angeles were worried Aimee was becoming a little too influential. Some saw her meddling in politics as a threat. They wanted LA to be seen as erudite and elite. The temple, with its faith healing and speaking in tongues, was not the image these leaders wanted out there. But Aimee was no country bumpkin. She knew that men in various positions of power didn't like the cut of her jib. Strangers, this episode is brought to you by IQBAR, our exclusive snack and hydration sponsor. IQBAR is the better-for-you plant protein-based snack made with brain-boosting nutrients to refuel, nourish, and satisfy hunger without the sugar crash. And did you know IQBAR isn't just delicious protein bars? They also have unsweetened flavored hydration mixes and IQ Joe, a jitter-free instant coffee packed with 200 milligrams of natural caffeine. And it comes in 4 different flavors that are better than any brewed coffee. I love the coconut chip protein bars, and I'm gaga for the hydration mix. Unlike other hydration mixes that somehow leave me more thirsty and have a gross aftertaste, IQ Mix is really delicious and actually satisfies my thirst. All IQ products are packed with clean, delicious ingredients that keep you physically and mentally fit, like magnesium, lion's mane, adaptogens, and more. The Ultimate Sampler Pack is a great way to try all IQBAR products and flavors. You get 9 delicious IQ bars, 8 amazing IQ Mix sticks, and 4 IQ Joe sticks. And right now, IQBAR is offering our special podcast listeners 20% off all IQBAR products, including the Sampler Pack, plus free shipping. To get your 20% off, text STRANGE to 64,000. Text STRANGE to 64,000. That's STRANGE to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details.
Bugs crashing your pack's party? Whether they've got paws or sneakers, your pack deserves a home that's protected from pests. That's where Wondercide comes in. Plant-powered protection made with steam-distilled natural essential oils that actually work. It kills and repels fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, and ants without questionable ingredients or overpowering smells. Safe to use around kids and pets when used as directed, lab-proven to work fast, and proudly made in the USA. We offer sprays for pets, people, homes, and yards. Plus, spot-on treatments, collars, and even shampoos. Whatever your pack needs, we've got it covered. Founded by a pet parent looking for a better way to protect her dog Luna, Wondercide's now protected over 21 million lives and counting. You might have even seen us on Shark Tank. Go to Wondercide.com and use code WONDER20 for 20% off your first order. That's WONDER20 at Wondercide.com. Wondercide. Protect your pack with plant-powered Wondercide today.
Aimee worked tirelessly, claiming to only sleep 5 hours a night, devoting her waking hours to writing and delivering sermons and ministering to individuals seeking her help. All this while dealing with a bevy of male preachers who had gotten their balls in a real twist over the very idea of a woman preacher, let alone one with so much reach and power. She was being attacked on pulpits and carefully watched by the press. It was a lot. And so, perhaps unsurprisingly, by the end of 1925, when Aimee was 35 years old, some people around her began to notice a shift. Aimee seemed tired, maybe a little less interested in her work, and as some closest to her thought, perhaps spending a little too much time in the engineering room alone with Kenneth Ormiston, who was, by the way, married. In an effort to quell growing rumors about the nature of Aimee's relationship with Ormiston and to soften her increasingly dark moods, staff at the temple insisted she go on vacation and hired a temporary preacher to stand in for her. Aimee left for Europe and the Holy Land rather reluctantly in January of 1926. Her reluctance, it seems, quickly gave way to shopping excursions to the most exclusive shops in London and Paris. When she had been poor, she preached a lifestyle of modesty and was rarely seen outside the temple wearing anything other than her church uniform of a modest white dress and a long blue cape, her hair styled in a rather old-fashioned bun. But now she was buying lingerie and short skirts and even giving guest sermons in said short skirts, a far cry from her early days. Money is a funny thing, you know? It's easy to extol the virtues of frugality and modesty when one can't afford to live otherwise. But with a few coins to rub together, it's amazing how quickly one's worldview can change. Meanwhile, Kenneth Ormiston was nowhere to be found, and Aimee's secretary caught wind that a gossip magazine was about to run a story that Aimee and Ormiston were gallivanting around Europe together. Minnie was apoplectic. She hired a security detail to surround Aimee, to which Aimee responded via telegram basically saying, "Da fuck?" By the time Aimee returned 3 months after she'd left, Ormiston's wife had shown up demanding to know where her husband was and filed a missing person report with the LAPD. But then Ormiston sent a telegram saying, "NBD, I'm just in Washington State, everything is fine," to which Minnie responded by demanding he return to the temple and do some radio shows to prove that he wasn't in Europe stooping her daughter. Soon, however, her famous preacher daughter possibly having an affair with a married man was going to be the least of Minnie's and Aimee's problems. On May 18th, 1926, Aimee and her secretary went down to Venice Beach after a sermon to decompress. She checked into a room at the Ocean View Hotel, which was her habit those days, in order to escape the throngs and pressures of life at the temple. Her secretary accompanied her to the beach, where Aimee jotted down a title for the sermon she intended to write for the following Sunday's service. The title was Light and Darkness. At about 3:30 p.m., Aimee asked her secretary Emma to call the temple to let them know she would be late and asked her to run a few small errands. When Emma returned a short while later, she found Aimee's Bible and her purse, containing the equivalent of more than $3,500 in today money, sitting on the towel. But no Aimee. But wait, there was Aimee, she was pretty sure, out in the water, waving, it seemed, to let Emma know where she was. Then again, maybe that wasn't Aimee? By 4:20, there were lifeguards and rowboats looking for her, and the hotel manager had called the police. Around 5 p.m., Emma called the temple and demanded to speak to Minnie, but she could barely get the words out from the weeping. The hotel manager explained the situation, and Minnie simply said, quote, "She is drowned." The hotel manager was basically like, not necessarily, you might want to come down here? And Minnie was like, "Nah, bro, no point, we'll send for her stuff." You know what they say, stranger, the show must go on. So Minnie grabbed 16-year-old Roberta, and the two got on stage for the planned evening service, which consisted of a slideshow of Aimee's trip to the Holy Land. The congregation, if they had not already known about the events at the beach, was certainly tipped off by the newsboys outside yelling about it. After the slideshow, Minnie introduced Roberta to the congregation and announced that she would be taking up the mantle for her mother, and everything would proceed as usual. She was so frank and matter-of-fact about the whole thing that even the Los Angeles Examiner commented on it the next day. Minnie believed this was God's will, and so be it, and moving on, folks, nothing to see here. Aimee Semple McPherson, arguably the country's most famous woman who wasn't a Hollywood star, the founder of the first megachurch, the self-made success story whose greatness was prophesied by her devoted mother all those years ago, was just gone. And then, shit got weird. In the wake of preacher Aimee's disappearance, thousands of mourners filled Angelus Temple and lined Venice Beach. Newspapers all over the country ran stories about her apparent drowning and the vigils at the temple and on the beach. The Los Angeles Times ran a story the next day with the headline, "Aimee Semple McPherson believed bathing victim." The Toronto Daily Star wrote, "Famous diver fails to find body of woman evangelist," and "Mystery shrouds passing of woman evangelist." And the Lincoln Star ran this poorly written headline, "No trace body of evangelist." Minnie did her best to put on a brave face and continue shouldering the business end of the temple. At one point, she received a ransom letter demanding $500,000 with instructions as to where to bring the money. She passed the letter on to the chief of police, who sent an officer to the specified place and time, but no one showed up. Psychics sent telegrams claiming to know where Aimee was. People wrote in to say they'd seen her here or there, but none of those leads led anywhere. On June 20th, 33 days after Aimee had gone missing, Minnie held a massive memorial at the temple, wearing Aimee's blue cape. Aimee had more than just drowned, Minnie told the crowds. She'd been raptured right up to heaven, which is why her body wasn't found. The collection plate that day brought in more than $500,000 in today money. Turns out dying is good for business. And then, on June 23rd, at the end of a scorching hot 100-degree day, around 1 o'clock in the morning in Agua Prieta, a small Mexican town on the border with Arizona, a man named Ramon Gonzalez heard a woman call out from his front gate, "Hello." Dressed in a gray house dress, a muslin undergarment over a corset and stockings, and wearing black slippers, with her hair neatly wrapped in a bun tucked in a silk hairnet, the woman, who didn't ask for food or water, but only a phone to call Los Angeles, collapsed onto the ground. After finding a translator and whisking the woman to the nearest emergency room, she weakly announced to the men around her that she was Aimee Semple McPherson. Strangers, when I tell you it was a circus after that, it was a circus. The press quickly caught wind of the miraculous return of the woman preacher and flocked into the hospital all the way from Los Angeles to hear Aimee's incredible story. Aimee asked the nurse for a curling iron so she could be camera ready when the paps showed up. And once the room was filled with reporters, Aimee told her tale. Here is what Aimee said happened to her in the 3 weeks between vanishing from the ocean at Venice Beach to showing up at a stranger's gate 600 miles away in a small Mexican border town. A woman approached as Aimee came out of the water at Venice Beach, begging her to come see her sick baby. Aimee followed the woman to her car, at which point she was shoved into the back seat, chloroformed, driven around for 14 hours, and eventually dumped in some kind of shack in Mexico, where she was shackled to the floor and guarded over by 2 people she said were named Mexicali Rose and Steve. There was a 3rd man whose name she claimed she never caught. The threesome threatened to sell her into white slavery if they didn't get the ransom they were asking for. Finally, in a rare moment when none of the 3 kidnappers were there, Aimee used the lid of a tin can to saw her restraints off, whereupon she ran into the desert to her freedom. She walked through the desert all day and into the wee hours of the following morning until coming upon Ramon Gonzalez's house and asking for a telephone. For the press, this was a goldmine. Hungry readers would devour any and all stories about this famous preacher who managed to free herself from the impending doom of white slavery. For police, however, some details about Aimee's heroic escape didn't quite add up. So while thousands of supporters showed up at Angelus Temple to cheer the return of their leader, Los Angeles police and the district attorney were going, well, actually. If the water Aimee had been in under the watch of Mexicali Rose, Steve, and the unnamed dude was hot, the water she was slipping into now was much, much hotter. And it would remain at a simmer for many, many years to come. Next time on Strange and Unexplained, was Aimee kidnapped? Did she really escape against all odds? Or was the whole thing a hoax? In part 2 of this story, Aimee's escapades continue, leaving a trail of destruction and actual human bodies in their wake. This episode was researched and written by me, Daisy Egan. My primary source was Claire Hoffman's terrific book, Sister Sinner. Sound engineering by Jeff Devine, music by Epidemic and Blue Dot Sessions. If you have an idea for an episode, head to our website, strangeandunexplainedpod.com, and fill out the contact form. I will write back. For more amazing content, join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab, where for just $5 a month you get all the Grab Bag exclusive shows, and for $8 you get those, plus Amber Hunt's Crimes of the Centuries and Strange and Unexplained early and ad-free. Grab Bag is an all-female and non-binary owned profit share network where our contributors get to keep ownership of their shows. We strive to give a platform to those who might not be able to land themselves on a bigger network. Who knows? Maybe you have a podcast idea you'd like to pitch to Grab Bag. We've got live recordings, watch parties, book clubs, and more. Why there's so much going on over at Grab Bag, you'll wonder if we missed the memo on how capitalism works. Join me on Instagram at SNUPod, Daisy Egan, and Grab Bag Collab, or head to the Facebook page to join in the conversation. If you like the show, please visit a sponsor with our unique code, give us a quick review and 5 stars, subscribe and download, and tell a friend. Stay strange.